Now, I know many of you dislike it when I bring Paul Politic onto the channel and I react to his stuff, primarily because, as you pointed out, his voice is not something that you'd wish upon yourself or your worst enemy. But it needs to be done here because I give this guy a lot of leniency. I don't really go after what he says all that much. I typically just say, "You're wrong. Here's a very brief opinion as to why I disagree with you." But this warrants significantly more because what Paul does here illustrates exactly what's wrong with the left. And it's their inability to live in the real world and actually view things through a lens of objective reality. Instead, they rely on postmodernist garbage where whatever they say is true because personal belief trumps reality. Because objective reality simply isn't real. Okay, and that's the problem with Paul here. He likes to differentiate himself from the radical left, but he still shares many of their talking points and shares them verbatim, and is incapable of truly engaging in political discourse objectively. And so, no matter how much he wants to differentiate himself from the radical left, differentiate himself from the nut jobs that are Marxists, he ultimately falls for a lot of the same beliefs that are rooted in Marxist ideology anyway. So I'm not going to hold back on this one. He's going to hear it. But yeah, this is him just repeating the same old lies that you've been seeing all over the internet for the last week. And I'm sick of it, so I'm not going to let him get away with it today.
As everyone knows by now, Charlie Kirk was murdered last week. It is obvious that this deeply unpleasant event will have a significant political impact. I denounce this hideous violence. Nobody deserves to be killed in this way. And killing Kirk only speeds up the downward spiral towards a cruel and brutal society. That is the reality. This fixes nothing. It only makes things worse. Having said that, I feel very limited sympathy for Charlie Kirk, and I...
Look at that, within 30 seconds, straight into the I have very limited sympathy. 30 seconds touched on, it was atrocious. Not covering why it happened, not covering, what we can possibly do to prevent such things from happening. Just a brief, I condemn political violence. Let's move on to character assassination.
Certainly won't be pretending that he was some kind of hero. He joked about the brutal attack on Paul Pelosi. He suggested that one of his supporters should pay for Paul Pelosi's attacker to be released from jail.
The reality wasn't that simple though, was it? And that's the part that Paul didn't want to touch on. Because to touch on it would mean that he can't really use it in the way he's attempting to. Charlie Kirk didn't condone the awful violence against Nancy Pelosi's husband. He questioned why the Republican Party or the conservative movement would be held responsible. What rhetoric did the Republican Party and the conservative movement espouse, which would lead to someone who is, for all intents and purposes, a gay schizophrenic nudist that's a hemped-up jewelry maker? What kind of rhetoric did the Republicans and the Conservatives share that would lead to this behaviour? How are they responsible for what happened? Because that was the narrative. They were saying, this is because of this right-wing narrative that's being pushed. Much like what's happening now with it was the left-wing narratives and rhetoric that has led to Charlie Kirk being killed. But in this case, it was kind of a bit more far-fetched, wasn't it? So that's what he was touching on. And so he jokingly, maybe half-jokingly, suggested that a good patriot go and bail him out and ask him some questions, because if you ask him some questions, maybe then you can discover why he did what he did. Maybe then we could establish whether or not it was justified to blame the Republicans, blame the conservative movement. Isn't it funny what context does? And I think the other irony of it was, and this was the ironic element of his actual statement here, and why is he still in jail? That was what Charlie asked on his show. Why is he still in jail? That's ironic because if a leftist did it to a Republican, he would have been bailed out.
He supported Trump, a man who incited an insurrection and pardoned the cop-bashing rioters who carried it out.
Oh, how dare he!
He on Israel's mass slaughter in Gaza. He created the conditions of normalized cruelty that led to his own death.
Victim blaming. So now here's the argument. Because Charlie Kirk supported Israel, he normalized the view of violence. He normalized it to an extent where violence against him was seemingly just part of the norm. It's his fault. The conditions in which we are now living is in part the fault of Charlie Kirk because he supports Israel, or he supported Israel. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say what Charlie Kirk believed about Israel because that's not relevant. I know what Charlie Kirk didn't say, and that wasn't that he supported the death of tens of thousands of people, because that's not the type of person Charlie Kirk was. But Charlie Kirk was a godly man. Charlie Kirk was someone who valued the word of God above pretty much anything else. And so his approach to the topic of Israel is different from someone like Paul. And Paul simply doesn't have the insights required to understand that. He doesn't have the insights required to understand why someone would both love the Jews, love Israel, defend the Jews, defend Israel, whilst also not at all being happy about the death of innocents. It's a hard balance to strike, because on one hand, if you were to oppose Israel, you'd be saying, yeah, I'm opposing Israel in defense of tens of thousands of people. On the other hand, you could oppose Israel and, well, you would be turning your back on what's expected of you as a Christian. Now, that's somewhat debated with respect to this conflict amongst Christians, but that would be the most simplistic way of putting it. Of course, it's far more complicated. It's extremely complicated. The Bible doesn't tell you to condone the sin of Jews. It doesn't tell you to support the sin of Jews. Not in any way. It doesn't tell you to support the horrors that Israel may commit. It does suggest that you pray for their salvation. And I know Charlie definitely did that. And he prayed for the salvation of all, including those who died in Gaza. So, whilst you may have a politically differing opinion on that particular conflict, it doesn't particularly paint him as a good or bad person, because I don't think that the majority of people who march down the street holding Palestinian flags are particularly good and moral people, if I'm being completely blunt with you, because as I said yesterday, I don't care anymore. To touch on the whole Trump thing, he was supposed to not vote for the guy who, led an insurrection and was never convicted of anything of the sort, because no such thing took place. So he wasn't supposed to vote for that guy because, in your view, Trump is morally reprehensible, and therefore voting for him makes the voter morally reprehensible. Show about 70 plus million people in the US morally reprehensible, along with the millions of people throughout the Western world who also, broadly speaking, support Trump, and at the very least, many of his policies and the conservative values that his administration stands on. Okay, so we're all morally reprehensible. Well, the other side is engaging in ungodly degeneracy, whatever. The point is, you cannot blame or attach the actions of someone else and put it on someone else as a means to disparage their character, least of all after they're dead, because that's despicable.
If you create a cruel world, you are going to have to live in it. That is the sad reality. Of course, the right-wing idiots wasted no time weaponizing the murder of Charlie Kirk to push their own brain-dead narrative. It was truly shameful and disgusting. They tried to blame the entire political left. Of course they did so, without a drop of evidence that the shooter was even a leftist. They were doing...
You may call logic a lack of evidence, but it's still logic, isn't it? Logic tells us that if a conservative political activist, commentator, whatever, gets assassinated, then it's probably someone who disagrees with him that did it, leaving a very large portion of the population who would have had motive versus the very, very tiny Groiper population who could have done it. Now, logic told us that a leftist did it. And logic proved us right in this case, as logic most often does. Now, given when Paul here published this video, he doesn't really have an excuse to be making this argument because he knows the people jumping to those conclusions were right. He knows. And today, as I'm recording this, it's even more right. There is not a single shadow of a doubt that the individual who assassinated Charlie Kirk was a far leftist. Not a shadow of a doubt. It's not even up for debate. All of the evidence is proving exactly that. From the unserious, admittedly unserious, engravings on the ammunition, to the testimony of his own parents that he was indeed a left-wing, to the fact that he had a conservative-hating boyfriend who's considering transitioning into a woman, to the, far-left Discord chats he has been a part of, to the various individuals on the far left, particularly located in Utah, who knew something was going to happen on this particular day ahead of time. There was never a shadow of a doubt that the left did this. What was disingenuous and disgusting was the idea that you would say, yeah, he came from a Republican family who were Mormons or whatever, and therefore he's automatically a Republican. No, that's not how it works. I'm sorry. You concluded that even though the actual outcome made no sense. We reached a conclusion, albeit prematurely, based on logic, and we were proven right.
Doing this long before the shooter was even caught. The shooter could easily have been a Groiper neo-Nazi, a group that is notorious for having long-standing disdain for Charlie Kirk. The shooter could have easily been some nutcase. Political shootings do not always have a political motive. The guy who tried to kill Ronald Reagan did it to get the attention of an actress. The guy who tried to kill Trump was a supporter of the Republican Party. Political killings are not necessarily inspired by political ideas. But this did not stop the right from shamelessly weaponizing the death of their friends to push a dishonest and disgusting political narrative.
Logic doesn't care about your feelings. Sorry, bro.
It is truly revolting how quickly they moved to weaponize this to attack the left. On the same day, I noticed the word hang was trending on Twitter. I clicked on it, big mistake. It was neo-Nazis fantasizing about hanging black people.
The interesting thing about that is I can't say I've ever found myself on that side of X. Never once, because I wouldn't click on something trending like that. I've never actually seen that trend. But yeah, I can't say I've ever found myself in the, far-right, full-blown racist side of Twitter, not the right-wing side of the racist side of Twitter. I've encountered the racist on the left side of Twitter a lot, but never on the right, because I don't engage with those, and neither did the average conservative, which, well, according to based on some of the accusations and beliefs that Paul holds of Charlie later on, you'd have to say the average conservative is a racist piece of shit. So, yeah, I can't say I've ever found myself around those sorts of comments, but the fact Paul has, maybe he was just looking for it. Maybe he's looking for that 0.1% of nut jobs.
One tweet with 25,000 likes simply said, "Hang that N-word." And of course, Musk was rattled by the assassination while he permits this on his website. And the political right turns a blind eye to this savagery. The political right is in no position to blame the left for anything. Did they forget that a right-wing lunatic murdered a Democratic lawmaker in Minnesota just months ago?
The difference about this and that, though, is the rhetoric of the Republican Party wasn't really to blame for it. It wasn't even to the conservative rhetoric, even separate from the Republican Party itself, wasn't even really to blame for it. This guy had his own vendetta against these particular people, this particular set of Democratic lawmakers, and sure, he had his ideological views, which happened to be of the more conservative, and he happened to only be targeting those on the left, those from the Democrat Party. However, no one in the Republican Party talked about these people. Most people had never heard of these people. This was a very, very precise and targeted attack against individuals that he knew. He knew. On a level not equatable to that of the average American and a random politician. This was his part of the country, his neck of the woods. He targeted these individuals because he had a very specific grudge and obviously a few screws loose. And there was broad condemnation from those on the right who even heard about it. Hell, I didn't hear about it until several months after the fact. Because it's the sort of thing that happens. We understand that, sure, there may have been a political motive, but that motive isn't inherent to the ideology that they hold. That's the primary difference here. Charlie Kirk was murdered because, ideologically speaking, he was fair game. In accordance with left-wing ideology, far-left ideology, if we want to be very precise for the sake of Paul, it was completely just for him to do what he did. I can't say I know anyone on the right who think, except for the literal fascists, who would condone what this guy did to the Hortmans. Okay? That's just how it is. Whereas there is a genuine assassination culture on the left. And you've seen that by the way that so many are responding to Charlie Kirk's death. That's just the objective difference here. We aren't the same. One side condones political violence, celebrates it, is ideologically conditioned towards committing it, and the other side has a few crazies who occasionally do horrific things and warrant condemnation. Not everyone responded to it the way they should have, but for the most part, they did. And there is no ideological reason for them not to respond with grace, with kindness, with empathy, with compassion. The left doesn't share that.
Did they forget that Trump pardoned countless violent rioters who attacked cops in an attempt at overturning the 2020 election? Did they forget that Republican Governor Greg Abbott pardoned a violent lunatic who murdered a Black Lives Matter protester and was found guilty for doing so? What about when Trump Jr. was joking about Paul Pelosi being brutally attacked by a hammer-wielding lunatic? The political right only have themselves to blame. They have spent years normalising and encouraging political violence. And now they dare to clutch their pearls and blame the political left. They are worthless scum, if ever I saw it.
Worthless scum. Okay, you can make up nonsense about how the political right genuinely viewed these issues. Sure, some of us joked a bit about the kind of embarrassing nature of the Paul Pelosi situation. We never joked about the actual violence. Not really. There'll be a few exceptions to that, of course. But it was more the embarrassing nature, the rumors swirling around, the fact that to this day that whole thing was a bit odd. The point being, you're trying to apply blame for what happened to Charlie Kirk, to the conservative movement, to the right. You're trying to say, yeah, it happened because you normalized, you created the conditions in which this sort of thing thrives. The reality is we didn't. The reality is, on average, a conservative is far more likely to be open to discussion. A conservative is far more likely to be receptive and willing to have a beer with you, to have food, to use the same spaces Conservatives, generally speaking, don't care if you're a liberal. They just care that you don't treat them like shit because they're a conservative. They will treat a liberal, for the most part, exactly the same as they'll treat anyone else. Just as they will treat someone who's a far-left lunatic troon the same way that they would treat someone at Sunday church, right? Like, we're not these horrible people who aren't inclusive. The irony is the right is arguably more inclusive. Charlie Kirk was a great example of that. Charlie Kirk was so inclusive of people with different lifestyle choices that he actively defended the addition of homosexuals in the conservative movement. That he actively shut down people who were conservatives further to the right than he was, who were attempting to alienate homosexuals, who were attempting to make people who make life choices you may not agree with feel like outsiders. Now, say whether or not that's right or not. You may, as a Christian, think that Charlie Kirk was wrong there. I don't personally. I think that was fair, because if you don't include them in the movement, which will lead them to salvation, then you're not doing your job.
Take no responsibility for anything. And now they are encouraging more violence with endless calls for revenge against the left. Supposedly, the left was to blame because the left call the right Nazis. And the right constantly accuse the left of being Stalinists and Maoists. They have been doing that for decades. They threw these sorts of ridiculous accusations at Barack Obama, for God's sake. Even New Zealanders were participating in this stupid rhetoric. These are the same people who pretended that Jacinda Ardern was our version of Hitler. And now they are saying left-wing rhetoric needs to be toned down. What a load of absolute crap. Of course, this whole event is infested with irony. Charlie Kirk famously said gun deaths are a small price to pay for freedom. He also argued that mass shootings should not give rise to emotional narratives. He also demanded that children be made to watch public executions. Of course, he never would have anticipated that he would be that execution.
So much to cover there, and I knew you'd go there. We all knew you'd go there. He, of course, wants to make the point. Gun violence, right? And how some gun violence, some gun deaths would happen. In defense of the Second Amendment, that's what he said. You know, the prevailing narrative from people like Paul here is that he believes that some violence, some gun deaths, they're necessary. They're necessary in order to defend the Second Amendment. But what he doesn't talk about is why, and the entire logic behind Charlie Kirk's position. He just took one little quote and ignored the rest. The reality is this, Paul. Charlie's acknowledged that yes, we will have gun deaths, or that the US will have gun deaths, because that is an unfortunate consequence of freedom. It's an unfortunate consequence of maintaining the Second Amendment, which is there for a very important reason. Whether you agree with that reason or not is completely irrelevant. The Second Amendment is there so that the country will not be unarmed in the face of a tyrannical government, so that the people can push back against tyranny. That is why the Second Amendment is there. Do you know how many more children would die if they weren't able to have guns to push back against that tyranny? Just look at countries under totalitarian regimes. Just look at countries who have had complete overthrows. What happens in absence of the Second Amendment is significantly worse than the consequences of it. The Second Amendment is there to protect the US, and the unfortunate consequence of that is that some people will unfortunately lose their lives unjustly. You know, he made the point in this exact same conversation, I believe, about why is it that we don't really see mass shootings at baseball games anymore, or airports, There are a couple rare occasions where there's a lapse in security, but why don't we see them in all these places where they put security, armed guards in after the fact? Because there are armed guards there. So why is it that we're happy to protect our football games, we're happy to protect our banks, we're happy to protect our airports, but we're not happy to protect our children? The number of lives that would be saved from simply having armed guards at schools would be significant. And the upside of that is you can get to keep your guns and you can defend yourself against the potential tyrannical government of the future. And it's naive to pretend that there will never be a tyrannical government, especially when the left has spent the last 8 years calling Donald Trump an authoritarian Nazi.
These sad ironies are everywhere. Some claim Charlie Kirk was a brave defender of free speech. He was not. He supported Trump, who campaigned on deporting pro-Palestine protesters, and is now doing just that.
If you're not from the country and you don't have anything value to contribute, then piss off. That's not anti-free speech. That's, we don't want you in our country because you're not providing anything of value. You're entitled to your opinion. If you're going to come here, you're going to protest and act uncivilized, frankly, because many of these protests aren't the most civilized. Many of them are just there for the sake of pissing people off. Then leave. Because if all you're doing is coming to the country, protesting in favor of another country, causing havoc, and not contributing, we don't want you. That's the logic that Charlie Kirk applies there. What's wrong with that? I would apply the same logic to Mohan Dutta of Massey University. He comes to this country, finds a cushy public sector job, or public funded job I should say, and then spews far leftist ideology. You're not of any value here, go back to your country.
He even called for Mehdi Hassan to be deported, simply for saying things he disagreed with.
Because he's an extremist.
Charlie Kirk values nothing. He does not even value life. His loyal defense of Israel's atrocities proves that reality.
He doesn't even value life. He values life so much. He values life so much he put his life on the line every single time he attended a college campus. He knew the security risks. And you know, you may argue that that's a disregard of life because he took the risk anyway. But no, he valued the lives of others so much that he put himself at risk, knowing what was at stake. But further to that, he valued life so much that even with the most outrageous hypothetical he could be posed about abortion and his daughter, he still said he would prioritize the life over giving in to the emotional whims of leftists. That yes, in the instance where a horrific thing has occurred and his daughter has been impregnated by some evil individual, that yes, he would do what he can to ensure that both lives are saved. That's how much he valued life. It wasn't because he hated his daughter, no, far from it. It's because he valued the life of the unborn, even when leftists actively dismiss the value of that life. The irony. The left is simply in no position to say someone does not value life when they themselves promote abortion, but they view it as an entitlement. They're entitled to murder their babies. Or because that baby isn't a particular age yet. They haven't developed to a certain stage yet, they don't count. Even though, genetically speaking, they are just as much a human life as you and me. The left is in no position. And it's absolutely no one, being honest, believes Charlie Kirk didn't value human life. I've already covered the whole Israel-Palestine issue with respect to Charlie Kirk as best as I probably am in a position to. So just reapply that here. This is absolute nonsense. You are just attacking a dead man. You're a character assassinating a dead man because you disagreed with his political views. That, my friend, is disgusting.
The right want to make a martyr of Charlie Kirk, but Charlie Kirk will never be a serious martyr. He is not a man of principle. Charlie Kirk was a tool.
Charlie Kirk was arguably one of the most principled individuals there has ever been in politics. Period. It's just a fact. You just have to look at the guy. There is not a single moment that I believe that guy was self-interested, that he put himself first. There's not a single moment where I thought he had any animosity towards others, that he didn't have love in his heart, that he didn't value every contribution, no matter how unhelpful. Charlie Kirk was first and foremost a man of principles. That is why he resonated with people, because he was so principled and yet so honest that he was not a perfect individual. I don't think the left actually knows what principles are. I don't think they know what someone with morals actually looks like. Because I personally think that someone who is as good-natured as Charlie Kirk is by definition a principled individual, because you cannot be so good-natured without being principled. Paul, I would hazard a guess, isn't the most good-natured individual. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that he is character assassinating a dead man.
A propagandist funded by the rich, a close ally of the president. He was a servant of the establishment through and through. He never said anything that would threaten the people with real power. That is the reality. Defending the wealthy and the powerful was what he existed to do. He was not an intellectual. I never saw him once share an original thought.
Yeah, you probably watched about 5 minutes of him, if I'm honest, Paul. Never saw him once share an original thought. Interesting. Now, perhaps that's because God spoke through him. Maybe that's it. Maybe. Or maybe it's because you can't acknowledge that sometimes good ideas are shared by many. Now, Charlie was just as capable of sharing an original thought as you are. And if we're being completely honest, I know my viewers will agree, he was significantly more capable of sharing original thoughts than you are. Because you're just repeating the nonsense of leftists. He stood on principle, as you deny he has. He stood on principle. He was steadfast in his faith. And he approached politics in a way that few have. He was quite unique in many, many ways. You know, the very fact that he's so unique in the impact and the influence that he's had, despite the fact his primary means of connecting with people was through thoughts, the expression of those thoughts, through opinions, through the exchange of ideas, would to me illustrate someone who is very much capable and who does engage in a lot of personal and individual thought. That's just how I see it, because I'm someone who is actually a bit more honest about these things. You're more than welcome to accuse me of not having an original thought, but we both know that wouldn't be true either.
He was a propagandist who loyally served the most powerful people in the world. The president, the Republican Party, the ultra-wealthy, Zionism, you name the powerful establishment cause, he served it.
The truth of the matter is, he didn't serve any of that, he served the one and only Jesus Christ. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. I don't care what you have to say. I don't even need to prove it, because we all know it. God knows it. And God is my witness on this matter.
He was an establishment tool to the core. We must not sanitize Charlie Kirk. He was the leader of an incredibly powerful propagandistic entity that served to radicalize young people. Funded by the rich and closely associated with one of the most powerful political parties on the planet. They act like Kirk was some average Joe with a few hot takes and a love for debate. He was not. He was a propagandist, pure and simple. Deceptively editing clips to promote a vile form of politics was his specialty.
That's hilarious given all of his carefully edited clips came from unedited full-length videos. Once again, we all know that you're lying through your teeth. We all know that his model was to go to universities, record the entire thing, post the entire thing, and then cut them down into shorter segments to post to get more viewer engagement in order to help fund their venture. Simple business. What they didn't do was carefully edit clips. You would see the entire exchange start to finish uninterrupted. That's just a fact. Go to Charlie Kirk's website, go to TPUSA. Charlie Kirk was not engaging in the nonsense you're suggesting. He was not engaging in propaganda. He sat down, had a debate, shared his views, allowed others to share their views. The conclusions you reach is entirely on the viewer. Him stating a particular thing doesn't mean you have to believe it. I'm not sure how you can call literal open debate propaganda. It's two people sharing ideas. One idea will make more sense than the other.
Charlie Kirk should not be sanitized. Some say we must not speak ill of the dead. Charlie Kirk called George Floyd a scumbag, so he would disagree.
George Floyd was a scumbag. The issue is when you speak ill of the dead and it's not true. That's the biggest issue. You see, people still believe that George Floyd was murdered. That's nonsense. The evidence doesn't support it. They were all like, oh, the autopsy says that, or the medical examiner said that George Floyd died of this particular thing. It didn't say drug overdose, it said this particular thing. A particular thing which, by the way, occurs with the exact type of drug cocktail George Floyd had. So, make of that what you will. It didn't say he died because the knee was on the neck, it was just inferred. Or implied, because they had to try and sell it to the jury that, well, if he didn't put the knee there, would he have survived? That's up for you to determine. The reality is, if you see the medical examiner's report, you see what happened. Derek Chauvin should be pardoned. And I know that Charlie Kirk expressed that exact opinion. Derek Chauvin should be pardoned. He did not murder anyone. Say what you will about the knee on the neck. It was an objective fact that George Floyd could not breathe before he even touched the ground. It was an objective fact that he was having a very, very bad reaction of the kind which can lead to the exact type of death he had before Derek Chauvin put him on the ground. The only reason he was on the ground was because he wasn't cooperating. The only reason he was on the ground was because he was a criminal thug. He died because he overdosed on a drug cocktail. Derek Chauvin was a political prisoner, is a political prisoner. That's just a fact. No amount of spinning the evidence like the left so often does changes that. You swap out George Floyd for a white man, the cop doesn't get in trouble at all, really. He might get a short suspension for being a little bit overkill on the knee, but he's not getting convicted of murder. Not at all. This was a political conviction through and through. It's there for everyone who's looking at it objectively to see. The left, unfortunately, abandon objective reality, don't believe it's even a thing.
Charlie Kirk was a vicious racist. He called the Civil Rights Act a mistake. He fearmongered about blacks prowling through the streets looking for white victims.
Stating that blacks are prowling through the street looking for white victims isn't racism, it's an observation of people who happen to be black and the ideology that they hold, leading to them targeting white people, which we know happens. Do we need to mention Irina Zarutska, for example, who was murdered by a black man who had been let out by a black judge 14 times because, I don't know, I got that white girl, he says. You don't say that unless it was racially motivated. We all know that there is a particular degree of animosity that sections of black, indigenous, and other minority communities have against white people. Notably, straight white people, but white people in general. This is the really, really big issue in the US in particular, just given how prominent critical race theory and the likes are. Which, if we're being completely blunt, is just cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is an evil, and it should be absolutely extinguished from everywhere in Western society. It's an evil. So he's completely justified in saying that because the crime stats support it. It's not because he has anything against blacks. It's not because he's racist. He doesn't even believe in race. Charlie Kirk believed that race was a social construct. He's correct in that assessment. It's a social construct, and frankly, it only came about as a means of justifying certain colonial practices. Race is a relatively new concept. It didn't exist before a few hundred years ago for a very real reason, because it doesn't exist. We are all the same. The difference is melanin in how we look. Bugger all else. Now, culture, that has a big impact on things, and we can very much hate certain cultures, we can very much oppose certain cultures, and we can want to change the culture so that we're not attacking people based on their skin color, so that we're not, targeting people or being more likely to commit crimes and whatnot. Because there's a very, very real reason why black people in America commit a disproportionate amount of crime. It's the culture. Now, as for the Civil Rights Act, the reason why Charlie Kirk had issue with the Civil Rights Act is because what it was used to justify after the fact. He didn't have an issue with the inherent civil rights of blacks. That's completely fine by him. He's more than happy for that. What he took issue with was how the Civil Rights Act has been misappropriated in the modern day to justify blatant racism, to justify things like DEI, to justify inherently culturally Marxist practices within the public sector and within the private sector. That's what he took issue with. It's something that's been inherently divisive in the modern day and is at the heart of the culture wars, if we're being entirely honest. You would know that if you had done 5 minutes of research, which we know you did not.
Those were the literal words he used. He argued for the Great Replacement theory, the idea that white people are being deliberately replaced by non-whites.
This is just a complete fabrication. He never argued for the Great Replacement theory. There is certainly no evidence that I've seen online, and many, many people have looked at this specific point to debunk it. If I bring up what I have on the matter, it's exaggerated fear-mongering. Kirk highlighted unchecked immigration strain on wages, housing, echoing Biden's own border crisis admissions, not a plot to replace whites, and PolitiFact rates the full theory baseless, but has data-driven alerts as factual. Now, meaning Charlie Kirk's whole position was that unchecked immigration is a problem. That's just an objective fact as supported by the data. It's a fundamental position. It's a fundamental talking point of the currently most successful right-wing parties throughout the Western world. The AFD, they talk about it. Reform, they talk about it. New Zealand First talks about it. In this case, Republican Party, MAGA, talks about it. Because it's true. It's a very real problem. We need to be more cautious of our immigration settings. That's it.
Inspired the massacre of 51 innocent people in the Christchurch mosque shooting. Charlie Kirk had spent recent weeks helping Trump cover up his connections to Epstein's pedophile network.
So I actually got in the comment section of Paul had questioned that point in particular about Epstein. And his evidence, this is his evidence by the way, was a bunch of leftists on a YouTube channel quoting CNN about a phone call that never happened. The alleged phone call that Trump called Charlie and said, "You need to stop talking about Epstein," and then suddenly Charlie stopped talking about Epstein. That's simply not true. But let's just get this straight. So not only has he lied about Charlie by calling him a vicious racist, simply no basis to that at all. You can't even be a racist if you don't believe in race. But now he's trying to say that because of the alleged links of Trump and Epstein and Charlie Kirk making comments on the matter and then not making comments on the matter after a while because he had said all he needed to say, he's suddenly helping cover it up. You have absolutely no shame, do you, Paul? And yes, Charlie did say that he had said all he needed to say on the matter of Epstein and that there was no point in continuing on about it because he had nothing more to contribute. That is it. It's not like he stayed quiet on it at all and tried to deflect from it and push a particular narrative. No, he just shared what his view was, what needed to be said, and moved on to more pressing matters.
Charlie Kirk was a piece of trash. Charlie Kirk was very critical of empathy. He said he could not stand the word empathy and considered it a mistaken New Age idea.
What did he really say, Paul? What did he really say? He believed that empathy wasn't appropriate because you can never truly understand how someone else feels, even if you have some sort of comparable experience to fall back on. In many cases, you won't have such an experience, and so sympathy is a far better word to use. Empathy was this new age idea, as you put it, that almost is used in a political way to, I don't know, manipulate people into holding particular beliefs, and that's not particularly helpful. The reality is sympathy. Feeling sorry for someone, even if you can't truly understand. That is the most appropriate term to use. And that was Charlie's point. Isn't it hilarious how you would show such a lack of empathy? Because no one making the point you're trying to make here has empathy, mate. Not for him, at least. That you would misrepresent his entire meaning in order to either justify or diminish what happened to him, to pass blame on him. It's despicable.
He said children should be forced to watch public executions. He was a truly barbaric, savage person. He wanted a cruel and brutal society. He got one. Political commentators like to pretend that they are spectators. They debate about the mass murder in Gaza or the school shootings. It is all very abstract to these people. This assassination is a hideous reminder that they are not disconnected observers. The commentator dies just as easily as a Palestinian. Perhaps that is the most important lesson to draw from this hideous event. Politics is not abstract. If you create a cruel world, you will have to live in it. You are not as disconnected as you feel. That is the horrifying truth. We would all be wise to remember it. We are going to have to live in the world that we create. We create a cruel and brutal world at our own risk.
And that's that, isn't it? It's all his fault. It's all Charlie's fault because he created the world in which killed him. That's the message that Paul has for you all. What an utterly despicable individual. How much contempt you must have in your heart for those of the conservative Christian persuasion. Because how disgusting it is to see. You spew utter lies for 9 minutes and attack him with such baseless accusations. He is, by far, a better man than you, by a number not even comprehensible to humanity. I'm not a man that likes to call people names if I can avoid it, but yeah. You can definitely apply many of the ones that you used in this video to yourself. And that's the least of it.